Not only do you need to know where your food comes from and how your food is grown, you need to know your beekeepers and how your honey is produced. Are your bees being fed antibiotics and being raised in plastic hives, or are they being raised in rhythm and in harmony with nature, where there's no antibiotics used and there's no pesticides or herbicides being used on the fields or the flowers that they are gathering the pollen from? Eric and Joy McEwen are owners and founders of Diggin, Livin Farms and Apiary. They are farmers and commercial beekeepers, as well as Joy is an apitherapist, where she practices apiary. And they have written a book called Raising Resilient Bees. This conversation does a deep dive into what raising resilient bees really means and how we can actually work in harmony with nature to raise bees, that we don't have to do the conventional things that we're being taught about raising bees, but we can actually trust our intuition and we can raise them using organic and biodynamic practices really successfully. Joy and Eric are surprising the bee industry by their success rate and how few hives that they have been losing over the last couple of years. Their loss rate is significantly lower than other commercial beekeepers who are not using natural methods. And it's being said that raising bees you can't do naturally, that you have to use the chemicals and that you have to use the antibiotics now just to help a bee survive. And they are showing that this is not true. So instead of experiencing a 30, 40, 50% loss like a lot of beekeepers are experiencing, even backyard beekeepers, they have only experienced a 20% loss in the last couple of years. So we take a look at what they're doing and why they feel like they're so successful at what they're doing. And we look at what some of the biggest mistakes are that beekeepers are making and what it takes to be a beekeeper and a successful beekeeper. We also take a look at what apiary is and how it's changing lives and helping people regenerate and reclaim their health. I'm Natalie Forsbauer, founder and editor-in-chief of Heart and Soul magazine. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us for this conversation and for our interviews. If you're enjoying them, then please hit that bell, subscribe, and share it with your friends. If you'd like to check out Heart and Soul magazine and get access to all the back issues which talk about regenerative farming and gardening and living and give you tools and resources that you can have at your fingertips, head on over to heartandsoulmagazine.com and you can join our newsletter for free, or you can become a member. You make yourself an amazing day. Enjoy this conversation with Eric and Joy. They are a treat and they are very generous in sharing their wisdom and experience with us. And be sure to check out their book, Raising Resilient Bees, published by Chelsea Green. The link is in the description of the interview. So thank you so much for joining me, Eric and Joy from Diggin, Livin Farm. I kind of dig your farm name.
Yeah. Thank you.
We did
Yeah.
it.
We
Yeah.
did it too.
Yeah, we did.
See what I did there? Yeah. So you're farming 60 acres and you're raising bees and you have your family on the farm. I'm just kind of curious, what got you started?
I think a desire for country living. We were both raised in the burbs, and we met in Oregon, and we met in a kind of a rural environment. We were living on a small parcel that had gardens and fruit trees and space for projects, and we were just taken with it. And it kind of, the spot and the time and the people just sparked off a lot of creativity and excitement about rural living and alternative living. And it wasn't long after that before Joy and I found our first place in the country together that we used as our template for experimenting with raising sheep and market gardening and fermentation and processing all kinds of food. And just really diving deep on all the elements of country living. And of course, right along with that was getting some beehives. And so that was our opportunity really explore that. And then we immediately kind of started that conversation about like, how are we going to earn a living in the country, in our rural environment? And we didn't know the answer to that.
But I think that was part of the inspiration as well in the beginning, was that we were living in Corvallis, Oregon, and they have a really strong agricultural community there, and just like a thriving farmers market. Tons of the community really comes out and supports the market.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was a production market farmer, and we were as well. We were
like successful organic farms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think we just kind of got that in us of like the excitement of even like becoming, what would it be to like become a market farmer, and how much fun that would be.
And then actually, we, in experimenting with trying to make money in different parts of agriculture, we rather quickly encountered the hardships, and you start marketing produce to restaurants or something and seeing how much of it ends up in the compost pile. And right away we were like, whoa, there's lessons to be learned here, and that was maybe one of the things that started to make beekeeping appealing, was the shelf stable nature of the product you're marketing. And that was kind of one of the early lures maybe, but then mostly it just caught on as a passion.
Oh, wow. That gave me goosebumps, the learnings of market gardening and farming. It's a steep learning curve and what's curious is you both came from really successful farmers, right? You're working with really successful farmers, and then to learn that to learn the back end of it, that must have been surprising at times.
Yeah. And we were fortunate to have good mentors in our lives that were earning a living in bees and farming. And
and the other piece of what you said, Eric and Joy, is that you wanted to make your farm profitable and viable, and I think that's such a powerful question to sit in and to ask as farmers, because a lot of the time the narrative can be that it's hard to make money farming, or you can't make more money farming. So I just love that you are rewriting that narrative for us as farmers. And bees were really a big part of it. And you just launched your newest book, or you have your first book out, right? Your first book out, which is Raising Resilient Bees. So tell us about what that means to raise resilient bees.
I love that question.
Great.
To us, I think raising resilient bees means raising bees in a fashion that reinforces their vitality and reinforces their ability to take care of themselves. And so it has many facets, right? It means making sure that bees have access to wholesome nutrition, that they're in good environments, also that the path that you're on and that the stewardship that you're interacting with the bees under is practices that are helping the bee species on the whole, and whereas I think if you look at domesticated agriculture, livestock husbandry, and all that, we can say there's a lot of actions maybe that have been taken with animals and bees in the past that were really about being better for the people involved in that relationship, not necessarily better for the bees. And bees are no different. And there's been a lot of things down the road that people have done to bees that I think have done damage to them as a species. And so for us, it's about kind of reversing that and stewarding bees in a way in which they're going to reacquire a higher level of vitality and in their natural setting.
And what portion of your farming is bees now?
Almost exclusively.
Yeah.
Wow.
We have some market garden greenhouses and things like that, and we'll do seasonal projects and stuff, but we don't. And well, and when I say what proportion is bees, that includes value-added products and services and things sort of related to bees. So, we make candles, we make medicine, we have a number of products that are sort of offshoots of bees. And so when I say almost exclusively, that includes all that.
But we do have about 40 chickens, 9 ducks,
We got 5
two
goats right
ducks,
now.
5 goats,
Awesome.
and a couple greenhouses.
Yeah.
So it's definitely like we're also just like part of us is just wanting to have a whole farm system, and that's something that just kind of is at the core of being a family farm.
Yeah.
So
And especially though, when in the early years, when we made a lot of our income at farmers markets, it felt really important to us to be really diversified so we could have a really full booth. So we would always try to grow some produce and duck eggs and different things so that we could just have this really full booth of farm products that really helped like broaden our customer base and help bring attention to the honey products and things that we made. So, and as we've transitioned and grown, bees has swallowed up a lot of our attention and is really where we make our money.
Right. And how many hives do you
a lot.
bring home to?
It's
Hundreds?
between about 600 and 800, really.
500 to 800, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
About
And
six.
what makes your practices unique?
Wanna start?
Well, go ahead.
There's quite a laundry list, but I
Yeah.
could try to keep it concise and say, well, for starters, we're committed to organic practices, and it's pretty hard to find anyone operating running a business like ours, managing as many bee colonies as we do with organic practices, and it's growing. The trends are growing because the data is there to support that it's doable, it's viable, and it's in fact maybe even becoming a more of stable way to keep bees compared to conventional practices. That's up for debate. But anyway,
let's just start trying to list
organic practices. And then as we were discussing a little bit earlier, the way in which we reproduce all of our new colonies is pretty different. And what's interesting is that it's as our book references, it's sort of a heritage technique. It's something that a lot of people around the world have been doing for hundreds or thousands of years, but it's not really the way in which bees are managed in the United States in this day and age. So we raise all of our queens in what we call a natural fashion, where we're sort of just leaving the bees to do it themselves. We're setting up a set of conditions to encourage the bees to raise a new queen, and then they do. And so we kind of keep our hands out of that process, and we allow them a lot more autonomy over it. And because of that, our operations population genetic structure is pretty different, and so it has a lot of implications with the way in which the bees interact on the landscape with the feral population. We also use bees without latex paint, built of natural products in accord with organic standards. But
we make our own equipment,
Yeah.
and that in itself is pretty unique. I mean, kind of having a wood shop for a beekeeper is similar, like just having a greenhouse to a farmer. A wood shop is really important just to be able to like mend and take care of all of your equipment. But we really use our wood shop because, well, one is the quality we're looking for like, what is the home like of where the bees live, of course. That would be very an important consideration. And what is organics, like where do they live? And so we want that to be have integrity. So the wood even that we use is sustainably sourced, and we have a daughter walking in right here. So sustainably sourced and local. And we use cedar and redwood. I mean, it's just a lot different if somebody wants to start beekeeping, or even like, I want to get 100 hives, and to make that phone call, and where's that wood coming from? Like, there's so many questions in that process that is just like up in the air. But we want those questions to be part of the integrity of our product and of our farm. So I was going to say that, and then also just the inside of the hive, that we also, that's also unique as well, is in the inside of the hive. We really encourage the bees, especially even in their brood nest, to draw out their combs. So to be using like foundationless.
allowing the bees kind of the more control over what the interior architecture of the hive looks like in a natural fashion. That's a tenet that's consistent with biodynamic standards, for instance. And then I was going to say, even something that this may sort of seem obvious, but we don't use any plastics inside our hives, and plastic has pretty much taken over the industry.
And then it goes right to the dump.
Maybe 75 or 85 or maybe even more % of the industry uses plastic frames inside the hives now. And when we got into the business 20 some years ago, that wasn't the case. And most people, the plastic frames were kind of just coming online, and everyone would build their frames out of wood and beeswax, and that was it. And it kind of turns out we're sort of old fashioned now, but we're like the only beekeeper of all of our professional colleagues that we work with. We're the only beekeepers that still make the interior parts out of wax and wood.
Well, and I've also I was surprised to even hear, people just trying to find just natural frames even online, and it's difficult to even just find them now.
Actually, our tiny little business is one of the only businesses that you can even get an assembled frame that has wax and wood as the building parts. You can order those pieces from supply houses and make them in your garage. But if you actually want someone to put them together for you and sell them to you, almost no one will even do it anymore. It's because it's sort of a lost art. It's a little bit more of a craft than just.
But we have pictures of our 5-year-old making. Yes. I mean, people can do this.
Yeah,
that's so cool. It's curious because I'm wondering, because there's such an epidemic with the loss of bees and the survival of bees, and bees dying and just not making it. And so I'm curious what the impact of that plastic has been. I mean, we blame a lot of it on pesticides and
those are good questions.
And it's curious that we've swung so hard over to the plastic. I remember being shocked when I first saw plastic nukes. I was like, what? It was just interesting. And that's everywhere. And like you said, the frames, and I grew up with wood everything too. So it was curious to me because I just think of bees being so natural, and I don't quite understand. I don't understand the thinking of going to plastic for them. But anyways, it feels like a bigger conversation.
Well, it's a good one though, just because I think really just to share is that to have compassion, that even just not very long ago, beekeepers were not the type of people who were thinking they wanted plastic frames. Somehow the industry threw it. These were people who care deeply about nature and weren't necessarily interested in this whole chemical solutions, so to just have a lot of compassion, that I don't know, it really got thrown at people, and now it's some kind of normal thing, but it doesn't have to be.
I will say really quick before we change.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Well, okay, I was just going to say, you were both on it. Okay, so I was just going to say that, Joy, I love how you just held space of compassion for beekeepers and for people. And because it's not just beekeeping that happens, and that's life, right? We have these values, we have this North Star that we are living in and that we are working towards. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves way off course. And it's not necessarily where we thought we were heading or where we thought we were going. And we're looking way over to the east or to the west, and kind of how did we get here? And so then how do we find our way back to that North Star? So I deeply appreciate that compassion that you so beautifully named and held space. Thank you for that.
I totally agree. Yeah, we talk about the plight of the beekeeper a lot, and that the beekeeper is almost more of an endangered species than the bees. And and it's like Joy was saying, they're compassionate, caring people that are heavily constrained by a global economic system that is outside of their control, and the industry is on very, very shaky legs, and it has very serious implications for how we eat, obviously. So It's a little scary, but
Well,
really
also-
quick, just on the
Okay.
topic of plastic and what we do different, I just really wanted to hammer one more home, which is that we follow biodynamic standards requirements about the packaging of our honey, which requires it to not be stored in plastic, to not be stored in tanks. So once the honey has clarified for a short period of time, it is to be put into the container that it's eaten out of and stored in the cold and the dark. And that is what we do. And that is very different than the industry. And so you cannot buy a liquid jar of honey from us for about 6 months of the year because we follow that standard. Whereas anytime you're buying a liquid jar of honey in the off season, for the most part, that's honey that was stored in a different interim fashion, oftentimes a 5-gallon bucket, and then warmed when the retailer requires more honey for the shelf. And so it's been reheated often in while being exposed to plastic, and then bottled and delivered. And so those are practices that we don't use. And so we think of that as a pretty important differentiation between the products we produce.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and with using, pardon me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And with using biodynamic and organic practices, how do you control mites?
Go ahead.
Very simply, there's actually a number of organic and biodynamic approved miticides that have been around for a very long time. A lot of them have been being used in Europe. Europe got Varroa almost 10 years before the US. And so a lot of these practices were even sort of first developed over in Europe. But in short, there are volatile substances like thymol and formic acid, but otherwise there's other organic acids that are contact fatal, and so there are some that are more effective and some that are less effective. And we pretty much tried all of like the commercially available ones and felt they were too effective and a little harmful to the bees, sometimes really harmful to the bees. And so we stopped. We never were comfortable using those, and so we kind of started with the experimentation of making our own. And after about 8 years ago, we kind of settled in on the use of a substance called oxalic acid. And it's pretty much the weakest miticide that has effect. There are substances that are less effective than oxalic, but oxalic's fairly effective. And that's pretty much the substance we use because we've never detected any real noticeable harm to the bees. There is the potential to harm bees with oxalic acid, but in the ways that we use it, we feel like it's really gentle. And because of that, it's somewhat, it's not as effective as some treatments. And that's actually where we want to be. So we're not interested in eradicating mites from our operation. It's really something that's important to understand. What we want is to prevent mites from, destroying colonies and, or having an undue effect on them. Yes.
Okay.
And so we use integrated pest management techniques like breaking the brood cycle, along with weak mite treatments like oxalic acid, to periodically lower the mite population, knowing full well that we're never really removing all of the mites or anything close to that. And by creating an environment like that, it's been kind of termed like a soft bond technique. The bond technique meaning is referring to that saying, live and let die. So the idea of a bond test would be that you would just leave the bees alone, let them die, and then reproduce new colonies from the survivors and hope that they survived because they're resistant to Varroa. But what we do is what they kind of call like a soft bond test, where you're not really letting the Varroa kill all the colonies. And you're using a miticide, or you're using a technique like brood removal or breaking the brood cycle to mitigate the mites' ability to damage the colonies periodically, at least, while trying to create an environment where the mites are still creating selective pressure for the bees to evolve their own resistance mechanism.
Very cool. That's a pretty thorough answer for that. Thank you. And what about another thing I see come up often in different communities and conversations is the use of sugar, organic sugar or not organic sugar. And some people say, don't use organic sugar. And then I kind of, my eyes glaze over and my question marks surface. And so I'm curious about your perspective on that.
Well, we just use organic sugar, and even in that case, that's just in an emergency if they're starving.
Okay.
But I didn't even know this, that people are
Right. I know this. I know what you're talking about. We've been using organic sugar since the beginning.
yeah,
We've never fed anything
yeah.
different. And
The way that
there's some science
encouraging
behind
people
why people talk
why?
about that. What you don't want in a feed is too much indigestible ingredients, because indigestible ingredients build up in the rectum of the bee and cause the bee to have to defecate. So it's true that in extremely cold weather, when the bees cannot fly, if you're feeding them something that has indigestible material, you can unfortunately create a condition that is referred to as dysentery, where the bees will defecate inside the hive, and that can lead to the spread of certain diseases. So that's what that whole thing is based
Sure,
on.
but then to like, I mean, can we just like talk about what would be the effects of organic sugar versus non-organic
Yes,
sugar,
Right.
please
and
do.
how that would actually
Yeah, let's talk
harm the
about
bees
pesticide
and
residues.
people and
Right. Let's
Yeah.
talk
So
about
tell us why we don't want to use regular sugar, like white sugar, that's not organic.
well, we don't eat that at
Yeah,
home.
we just
We don't even eat that as people. Like,
I suspect that it's full of pesticide residues. But aside from that, like a lot of sugar sources,
I'm not quite sure how to do that.
um, a lot of sugar sources are like from corn syrup, for instance, as a genetically modified product that's probably full of glyphosate residues. I don't think that's good for bees. Beet sugar is a GMO that's probably full of glyphosate residues and is a cheap sugar that a lot of beekeepers take advantage of.
Mhm.
And, we could just go on and on. But yeah, so to us, like evaporated cane juice is actually more similar to a floral nectar than something that's so highly processed like white sugar.
Mhm.
And like I said, we've been doing this our whole lives. And then, honestly, when we went down and spent time in Central America, and you see all the beekeepers down there, they feed what they call cruda. It's basically almost like brown sugar. It's crude sugar, and it's soft, and it's got way more indigestible material in it than the white sugar, the organic evaporated cane juice that we use. And they feed it to their bees all day down there, and they have no problems. And
Um,
so you realize it's really about like some context. Like, okay, if you had to do emergency winter feeding in weather below 50 degrees, would that be harmful to the bees? I
mm,
think, in our old days of feeding more than we do now, we would occasionally see a hive that suffered some dysentery in probably conditions like that. It
mhm.
was never a universal thing in all of our hives. It was probably a hive that was already having problems and predisposed to that condition anyway. Um, but just on the subject of feeding, I will advance the conversation a little bit and say we don't do much feeding. And how we avoid that is we run our operation really heavy with honey. So somewhere between a third and a half of all of our colonies every fall, we will run into the fall with more or less an additional 30 pounds of honey on, up and above the anticipated need of 60 pounds or so that's down lower in the box. So meaning about a third or a half of our colonies will run into fall with up to like 90 pounds of honey on them. And then we will come back through our colonies in the spring in March. And if we find a colony that's deficient, it's very, very easy to turn to one of those colonies and pull a whole bunch of honey off and just fill
Mm.
it back in. And so we never hesitate to move honey around. We move honey around all the time. That's another practice that people tell you not to do. We don't use antibiotics, and we move honey around. And guess what? We don't have brood disease problems. So I think there's more to that conversation than people want to suggest.
Wow. That's really
Anyway,
powerful.
so mostly we move a lot of honey around, and then we do reserve the right to feed in dire situations. We had last summer, we had a yard on the coast, about 50 colonies that in 2 yards on the coast that we fed some sugar at the end of summer because we didn't like the weight that they had. And then this year, coming out of winter, we fed about 100 out of 500 colonies some additional sugar. And that was really just for a short period of time until we could really get through them and do what I was referring to and move honey around. So we just like moved them down. We put sugar feeders on them, fed them some organic sugar. And then like 3 weeks later, we were putting frames of honey into those same colonies.
And then also just coming out of winter, in contrast to most of the commercial beekeeping operations, where they're just filling up tanks of high fructose corn syrup with a gallon of bleach. And they're like, don't you want some of this? We're like, no.
So let me just repeat that. A lot of commercial beekeepers will feed their bees corn syrup and bleach.
They use liquid sucrose. They use all kinds of strange stuff, but they do sucrose corn syrup blends, and they do pour bleach into it because fermentation is really dangerous when you're making up liquid solutions of carbohydrates. Obviously, fermentation is on the brink, and if it happens, you'll kill bees. So people pour bleach in it to keep it so that they can drive around with it in the hot sun for weeks and not have it turn.
Yeah, it's stable. And so
they put time on it.
What is your loss like on average yearly?
I love answering that. You know, when we got into beekeeping, we were adamant we were going to do this the hard way, and we did. And we almost always had losses exceeding 30%, and 40% or higher was not uncommon.
When we first
and then like there would be like another round of losses because a lot of times out of the 50 or 60% of the colonies that lived, 20 or 30% of those were in really bad shape, maybe wouldn't even make it, you know, fully into a summer or something. So,
but this was also during the time that we didn't have enough bees to mellow out that relationship between having imports and outports from the farm itself. So all of these bees and these problems or these queens or whatever the case was coming from outside of the farm. So now when Eric is talking about just like how our loss numbers are a lot lower now, you can also just kind of put that in perspective that we don't have a lot of inputs coming into our farm.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that, I think that's a great point. When we got into the industry, you know, beekeepers told us, look, if you can't keep your losses under 20%, you're not going to make it in this business. And we failed. We never could do that. We were always 30, 35, 38% losses. And meanwhile, you know, the commercial guys were sort of poking a little bit of fun at us, suggesting that we were not being good beekeepers, or that our methods were ineffective or whatever. But what's rather interesting now in the last decade, it's kind of flipped. I mean, in that now we just had our second year of losses under 20%, and that is kind of new for us. So we're pretty excited. And meanwhile, the industry is reeling from 30, 40% losses in various parts of the country year in and year out. And so there's sort of something going on there. I think our problems are stabilizing and getting tractable. And we feel like we're getting a handle on things. And we think we know why. There's 3 or 4 things that we've been doing in our operation now for long enough that we think they're all contributing a portion of our success. So there's no silver bullet.
But, and what are those 4 things, just really succinctly?
So raising our own stock.
So we haven't brought in any new genetics.
We're 8 years of no new genetics introduced into the operation. And so we do all of our rearing of our colonies in isolated locations away from other commercial beekeeping operations. So we feel that we are on our way to the development of our own inbred line of bees that are developing multiple resistance mechanisms to mites. That's one. We think that our hives provide a superior environment to the bees. And
our type of hives, our equipment that we make, which is unique.
Yeah, I mean, very superficially, our box hives look like other people's box hives, but there are features about them that I could go on about that we think improve the quality of the environment for the bees.
Mhm. And one of
And
those
then,
things, just really quickly, is the three, it's not, they're not like the
The three-sided and the fact that they're from cedar or redwood.
four-sided
foundation
frame,
is,
right? They're three and they're cedar or redwood. Okay. We don't have to go into that right now. And I
yeah,
just want to plug your book because your book in Raising Resilient Bees is so awesome because I mean, there's a lot of words to read. And at the same time, there's a lot of really good diagrams that help us pull apart those words so we can actually read the diagrams and then confirm what we're seeing with the words, or we can read the words and like pull apart and synthesize it with the diagram. So I just
oh,
wanted to say a big bravo for a very well done and very well laid out book.
wow, that's a great
Yeah,
compliment.
thank you so much.
Lastly,
We just want people to keep reading. Of
Yes,
course we can
yes.
start doing more videos, but to also, yeah, encourage people to buy the book. So
read,
thank you. Yeah.
and we love to read. Just one more that's a big pillar of our success, we believe, is we practice. So in rearing of our new colonies every year, we use kind of a heritage technique, if you will, of what we call a walk-away split. And so a walk-away split is different in that the queen in the split is going to be reared from eggs. So that process is a 30-day process. So from the time we remove the walkaway split to the time that you have a queen laying her first egg will be more or less about 30 days. And that process causes, in our opinion, a whole lot of the mites in that starter colony to be shed or become non-reproductive by the time there's brood available. And so our new colonies become very, very clean, and they become in that process a repository to put mites from our overwintered colonies. So 2 times every spring during swarm season, usually in March and April, sometimes April and May if we're having a cold, wet spring, but 2 times during our swarm season, we will remove large portions of the capped brood from inside of our parent colonies and send them off in walkaway splits for the rearing of new queens. And that is a big reduction in the total numbers of mites in our overwintered colonies at the time when the mite population is building very rapidly. And so by timing it for swarm season, you've had a couple rounds of brood reared before that, and that's actually when the mite population is really going to start growing. And we're pulling huge quantities of those mites out of our overwinter colonies and sending them off to die elsewhere, thereby stabilizing the numbers of mites in our overwinter colonies in the spring and allowing us to put off doing a mite treatment until summer with our overwinter colonies. And so that's sort of our practice now. We feel like that is what's been a big part of our success. We're taking a big chunk of the season of population growth for the mites away from them, and now they have to build their numbers from more like late spring, early summer until the bees finish rearing brood, and that's a lot shorter period of time for the mites to grow.
And then just in contrast to what folks usually do to make splits would be to order a queen, and then so to not have that break in the brood cycle, instead to just pinch the queen or whatever the case may be. But it's a really different way of making splits.
So you're literally growing your flock, growing your bees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's really neat. What do you think is most misunderstood about beekeeping?
I think, I mean, I guess one of the things just getting started for folks is, of course, you would see us in our suits and tending and caring for the bees. But I think a big part of what we actually do is we watch flowers I know that sounds just like a simple answer, but like that is one of the jobs as a beekeeper is like not only to take care of the bees, but we really do watch the bloom, follow the bloom, and like what is specific about the bloom that makes this certain bloom a really high nectar content.
Mm.
And that just feels like part of the excitement for us is when you get to see like these certain hives just gaining a lot of weight, bringing in a lot of nectar. And so what was that made it special? Was it us like the way that we care for the bees? But a lot of times it is just kind of watching your surroundings, your environment, of seeing what actually is like prolifically in bloom right now.
Mm, I
I
love
got
that.
one too. I like that.
Okay.
I think that, I feel like I'm a member of an alternative community in this society, and I think that I think one of the things that's most misunderstood about beekeeping is sort of something that's typical of many industries, but that people operating at a commercial scale really get vilified, and I get it, and I share a lot of the concerns that people have about, like animal husbandry, animal welfare, or sustainability issues, or environmental pollution issues, water use. I like share all those values. And yet, what I want to be, like Joy mentioned earlier, is like a bridge. I want to be someone who's helping us understand each other instead of like point fingers and label each other. And I think that commercial beekeepers, I think, get misunderstood as bad people. And you're just like, it's way too hard a work to do if that you would do it if you were just motivated like by selfishness or something. Like it's way too hard. There's so many other ways
It's
to make a
hot
living.
and cold
Yeah,
in the
and
middle of the night a
right,
lot.
the conditions that beekeepers are willing to work in clearly demonstrate their love for the bee and their love for being involved in food production and what have you. And so, do these systems have problems? You bet. Do we have to address them? Yes. Do we need to make radical change in how we produce food for our society now? Yes. But we're not going to get there by, shutting everything down. Like we have to get there by making change.
Mm,
Yeah.
I love that. I'm wishing I could remember somebody's name right now, but when I was in Saskatchewan and I was all excited to get a beehive or two, I ended up with one. Um, there's a couple gentlemen there at the farmers market who just kind of took me under their wing, and David was one of them, um and they both just talked. When I talked about bees, they talked about flowers, and I just remember being so awe-inspired by them and how flowers were probably the biggest part of our conversation. And it really, I had never had my own bees before. I was raised with bees, and there's kind of always bees around our farm. And I just remember how powerful it was and how it totally took me on a different journey as a aspiring beekeeper when the conversation was all about flowers. When I was like, what do I need to know? And yeah, it was very, very profound. And so when you mentioned that, Joy, yeah, it makes my heart expand because it's like, it's not what we see, it's how we see things. And that's true about all of life.
Right.
And I think we're all just kind of going through like I've been saying it lately, just a great remembering. Like
Yeah.
there's just like this intuitive part that if we can just kind of get in touch with it, it sure does help guide our next steps, you know.
Hmm. So tell me more about intuition and beekeeping. How does that dance with the art?
You first.
Well, when we were at the biodynamic conference, and someone came up to me afterwards, and he was sharing with us just how much he enjoyed our talk, and that he only had a couple of hives, and he was struggling with them, and he had a beekeeper come out to try to help him with what was going on with the hive. And he probably had some internal intuition about like what he wanted to do, or he got to know them. They were his bees. But he said that he came back inside and his sweetheart said, like, well, what did they say? And he was like, they told me I have to pinch the queen and buy new queens and go buy this. And she was like, what? And he was like, ah. Like it didn't match his intuition. His intuition was like, I don't want to go, what is a more simple solution that is more in tune with my values? And at the time, he wasn't quite sure because he had, it would be a new thought, like no one had introduced that
The
to him.
language, yeah.
Yeah, but so yeah, I feel like that was a good example of someone who were like that solution was not in tune with his intuition, and that if he really kind of went deeper with some new information, that could help him form a different solution.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add a little story about intuition. Like I feel that intuition about the bees or about our relationship with the bees and the right thing to be doing becomes this like almost like a psychic connection. And the best way I can describe it is that I get these feelings inside and they become urgency. Like, and it'll be different, it'll be like it's always related to my care for the bees, right? My part, like what I have to do. Where am I, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to be doing? And it comes to me and it usually comes to me over a period of a couple of days. And then it reaches this like crescendo of just like, I've got to get to this place and put supers on. I know I got to get there. I'm late. And I get there and I'm like right on time. Like it's crazy. Every time I'm right on time. I think I'm late, but I'm right on time. And it's like, I feel like they're sending me messages being like, yo, if you don't want us to all swarm, you should be bringing some boxes around about now. And I like get the message and I show up and they're like, yeah, like that.
Well, I think that's true for so much of agriculture is that it has to be in the right timing. Wendell Berry, he says, that nature is the standard for production and work. And for that window somehow like for it to be like the optimum timing is critical.
Yeah.
Beekeeping
is all about timing. And if you are behind, you'll never be a good beekeeper.
Oh, interesting.
Be right on it. There's these tiny little windows. And if you're early and you're trying to force it, you won't be good. Then you're not compatible with the bees. You have to be like working with the bees into it. The bees' natural cycles. You have to be completely in tune to the bees' natural cycles and not late.
Interesting. And what do you think the biggest mistake beekeepers make?
Trying to think about like well the difference like in answering that like for a backyard beekeeper versus like a commercial beekeeper.
Yeah, tell us both. What's the biggest mistake that a backyard beekeeper would make, and then what's the biggest mistake that commercial beekeepers?
I kind of think I could summarize it by saying they do what they're told to. They all do. And that's the problem, is that somebody comes along and tells them what to do, and they just do it instead of like asking themselves, because, I believe that we all have the wisdom and the answer to every question already inside us. And so if they took the time to ask themselves if doing that is actually what's compatible with them, then I think they would avoid, because there's just so many practices in beekeeping right now that like there's this great book called First Lessons in Beekeeping, and it's a very modern, very conventional summary of beekeeping practices as they are practiced today. And we always tell people to read it, and it's very conventional, and it tells you about how to apply antibiotics, and it tells you about the best kinds of plastic frames to get. But I always tell people, read the book. You can read it in a weekend. It's like $14. You can read it in a weekend, and then you have all the language to talk to any beekeeper, and you'll understand what it is people are struggling with, and you'll understand what answers they're probably going to have for it. And I say, just because someone tells you to do something doesn't mean you have to do it. So read the book. Don't be afraid to read something that might have a totally conflicting point of view, but at least then you understand why they do what they do. And then you can think, I'm not going to do it that way.
Okay, I have something I could share too, which is that it's like this power of observation. I feel like in contrast to a lot of just like vegetable farmers or like they can even be a little bit on a schedule. Like we do this, this is this time that I do this. For pretty much it's like so interesting on the farmscape. I feel like this is true of most all livestock. Like you kind of don't know what you're going to do. It actually is so cool because it makes you pause. Like farming is like go. Like a lot of times taking care of livestock, you have to kind of observe first before you even know what you're going to do. So going along with what you said, which is like being, just doing what you're being told, instead of just like observing the situation first,
right.
and and making observations. And
That's really powerful. Wow. What role do bees play in soil health?
You go.
Oh, well, we love this topic.
Yeah.
Because people don't really think about this so much. They think about honeybees, I feel like mostly as like awesome pollinators and then also for honey production, but they don't really think about honeybees as regenerative agriculture. Recently, I was talking to a really fancy grape grower, and he was kind of trying to share with me like bragging that they didn't need to have pollination services. They don't need to have honeybees on the farm. And I was like, yeah, but if you actually want to be a farm, you really do need to have some kind of livestock component to it. And if you had honeybees there, you can have like this aerial fertilizer system happening without having the compaction. And he was just like, I never thought of that before. This is like a very fancy person. And that's what I think is so true. People just aren't really thinking about how much, like, so for example, when Eric and I like we'll have a pallet of hives with 4 hives on it, and you just move them from one place to the next. When we leave them there, you see this ring around the pallet of just lush greenery, like
a lot of nutrient cycling. It's a huge input of nitrogen. And it's like most evident locally, right? Within a few feet of the hive. But there's no doubt that effect is across the landscape.
When we pull up to a bee yard just in our bee truck, when we leave, the windshield has tons of bee poop on it. So like it's happening. It's like happening by like millions of creatures that are, adding to the fertility of soil health for sure. In quantity and quality.
We've seen it, the nutrient cycling associated with honeybees stimulate soil communities back from non-existence almost, so we'll put beehives on soil that's all mineral soil, devoid of any topsoil, no plant life whatsoever. And then bam, like now the nutrient availability is there, and boom, a plant community takes off. And literally we've seen that across whole rocky pastures. I'm not talking about a couple feet, I'm talking about acres that we've seen regenerated by honeybees
with
on site.
Flowers and other insects, more increasing the carrying capacity of the land for humans, deer, bear, birds, insects.
That's another layer to how honeybees affect soil health, is that honeybees will rehabilitate plant communities that are in decline by tending to them. Most plants, when they are properly pollinated, that will produce a bigger seed set and increase the population. Or with perennials, when perennials are properly pollinated, it creates a nutrient cycling feedback loop inside their metabolism where they will allocate more resources to floral productivity in subsequent years. So literally by having bees around, you're growing the productivity of individual plants, and you're also growing the productivity of populations. And think about what happens when you say, like, for instance, I can give great examples like false dandelion or annual lupins. when those aren't really prevalent and you just have mostly, say, annual grasses or something, and then you see all these other plants growing in cover over time, those are all different root structures, right? That are tapping into different components of the soil strata and bringing nutrients from different places and making all of that again available to the bacteria and what have you that are up in the A horizon. And so honeybees are like drivers of that by creating abundant seed set on, you know, relatively few individuals and then growing that population over time. It's so cool to watch.
Yeah.
That is cool. You know, when you say that, I'm just automatically all the beehives that I've witnessed in my life pop into my head, and I can see the imagery of the darker, taller grasses all around them and the more energy. And I remember I just love bees. I just used to like I used to just sit with them when I was little, and I was always so curious about them, and I'd find them in the water and I'd save them, and I would be curious how many times they would fall in the water before they would sting me. That wasn't the kindest thing I did, but it was always so curious because they were so trusting. Like they were so trusting. And then I remember finding we had a raspberry patch, and I remember finding a bee stinger on a raspberry and picking it up and wondering like what would happen if I like if it would still sting me if I put it in my finger. It still stung me. You know, I put it
That's
in, I
apitherapy. Nice
squished
work.
it. Pardon me?
That's apitherapy. Nice work. I have to do
Yeah.
that quite a bit with even sometimes trying to reuse a stinger or do a micro sting.
Yeah, and so
That's
that's
so
part of your
cool.
practice too. And so tell us about that. Tell us about the apitherapy.
Well, apitherapy in general is just kind of using all the different products of the hive as medicine.
Okay.
I sit on the board of the American Apitherapy Society. When I first went to a conference from them, it was in 2013, and I was just like enamored by everyone there. There was just a lot of professionals and doctors and acupuncturists, and I was one of the very few just laypersons beekeepers. And at the time, they were really just presenting all sorts of, papers, research papers on the benefits, the health benefits of the products of the hive. And yet, well, specifically bee venom,
Mhm.
when they, as doctors, want to prescribe or talk about it, their hands are a bit tied for what they can and can't say. And so, even from the beginning, they're just like, you're a beekeeper, you can get this information out there. And we are really into health and our health of the planet. And so I just got into it right away. We had a few other things happen. Like I have some job problems, and so I was working on my job problems with the bee sting therapy and your carpal tunnel probably along the way. And so then it was like just trying to learn how to do it. And I had like a little while there where I was just like learning how to sting my knee over and over. And once I became comfortable with that, we had a natural food store for 9 years in downtown Cave Junction. And so I had a real public space there where I was talking to people a lot about the health benefits of honeybee products. And so I started just having people want to try it.
Mm.
And then it just really turned into a practice. I was helping people with just like all sorts of like,
Conditions.
yeah,
Yeah.
conditions where they were struggling with, having a few different back surgeries and couldn't drive to Grants Pass. And then we would go, I mean, I have amazing stories, like people who can't really move their shoulder, and we would just hit it pretty hard with a lot of different stings. And now, like full mobility. I mean, arthritis is a really easy one, obviously.
Mm.
And then right now it's getting a lot, it's just very noteworthy in the Lyme's disease community and
Mhm.
autoimmune diseases. And of course, there's just, that is just, there's just so much unknown there, and people want to just kind of say, this must be an autoimmune disease. And here, why don't you do all these tests and a lot of money, go to the hospital? It's just like, buy, 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 buy. Keep buying stuff and not really think about the tools in your toolbox and helping people help themselves and really just nature as medicine.
Mhm.
And I love when I get to like talk with people, do some talks where like that concept is like alive and new to people, and then they kind of learn and remember that they are their own healer. And it's just a really a beautiful process. And we're busy, and I'm very passionate of just being a beekeeper alongside Eric. But I absolutely I love helping people, and I really enjoy doing apitherapy, so I continue to do it.
Oh man, that's really cool, Joy. And so with the apitherapy, there's using the bee venom, and then of course there's actually the sound of the bees, and we're learning how resonant that is with our nervous system and calming, and then there's of course, oh, the honeybee, the smell, right? The smell of the
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
the hives and the candles and the wax and the bees themselves, and like and then there's what's it called? The bee pollen that people will use as well, right? And so I'm curious, what you have something really cool on your farm that you've built, which is where people can actually you have a bed that
Mhm.
incorporates bees. So tell us
Uh,
about that.
well, go ahead.
Mm.
Well, I was just gonna start by saying on Instagram we got the handle Airbnb.
Yeah.
I know.
That's cool.
It's like, well, it is because it's all of those things. It's really to talk about. Hi there.
Yeah.
So we recently built a hive hut,
Mhm.
as we call it, and it's just an adorable. But again, this is a type of therapy that has been around for a long time, and actually even throughout the world, and especially even in Europe, these these things exist. Like we didn't like invent this by any means. So
Mhm.
there's so
Describe it.
yeah, it's really ours is just a cute little chamber, and there's a few different, there's a lot of different examples around the world of a smaller one or a larger one. We have ours where we have like three hives kind of inside the structure, but we access them on the outside, so they're kind of in a drawer,
Mhm.
and we appreciate that a lot because some of the other ones, they access the bees from the inside, and that's really difficult when bees like fly to windows and to try to get.
You got to get the bees back out of there
Yeah.
before you have a customer.
So we didn't want to do that. So we figured it out to just have this shelf so that we could be working the hives from the outside. And then when we push it back in, it has vents that then vent the hive air throughout the sleeping chamber. And you can also hear them and feel them. And
Yeah, or wear and there's or a respirator mask.
yeah, and we also have a respirator mask as well to make it just that much more intimate,
Concentrated.
concentrated. Yeah.
Oh wow, that
What
sounds
else
like
do you want to say about
heaven.
that?
I was gonna say nothing about Hive Hut. I think
About that?
you just covered it.
Okay.
I love it. I love the hive hut. Um, so cool and so powerful. So, what are some of the conditions that some people might use apiary for or apiary for?
Well, that is just a broad term. So the apitherapy is using all the products of the hive as medicine. So that would include beeswax and bee pollen, propolis,
Honey.
Mhm.
honey would be a big one. Of course, we
Mhm.
talk a lot about honey in our book. Um, and then royal jelly, hive air. Am I missing one? Oh, and then
Should
bee
be
venom.
venom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so in that case, I mean, all of them for different reasons,
Mhm.
but honey in particular right now, I don't know, I guess a really easy one for a honey one is just there's a lot of folks in the US that maybe don't know that honey is really great for burns or any type of skin rash whatsoever. If you have a burn and you kind of know like, that one's gonna hurt, it's probably gonna be a few hours. Generally, even doctors say, I mean, honey just cuts the heal time in half. like would that be the right way to say
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah. And so many other things. Our middle child, she just has skin sensitivity if she ever like goes to grandma's house and has like weird laundry detergent or something. And and so she'll get some like rashes, and you put honey just right on it, and it like will clear it up in just such a short amount of time. Of all of our organs, you know, skin of course is our biggest. And
Yeah.
so it it just really is really therapeutic to any type of
Mm.
and it's also a great way to just topically take in all of the nutrients and vitamins too.
Yeah, so true. I know most of my body likes honey on it, but my face does not. My face
Oh yeah.
burns if I put honey on it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really other. My first homemade honey mask was not what I thought it would be, but it might also have been an indication of s- like my skin was telling me something. So
Yeah,
that doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. It was just more information, right?
right.
Informational. So, and I don't know enough about honey yet to know what that would have told me.
I find that interesting. Hmm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would actually give it another try.
Yeah, I
You,
will. I'm
you know,
super
maybe
curious. It
just
just got really
yeah.
hot and red.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to. I'm going to try it again. I could, and it could have been the honey too. You
I
just
Well,
was gonna
yeah, I
say
was gonna
that.
say it's gonna
I
be
was gonna
different.
say that. I just wasn't going, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Interesting.
Well,
So what are three things that you think every beekeeper needs to know
wow.
or understand?
You're getting
Okay.
I just feel
Three
like
things. I think the
the main
okay.
one is just I think that it is possible to take care of bees naturally, even on a very large scale.
That's a great first one.
I
Totally.
mean, this was a really long time ago, but when our oldest was a baby and we went to the bee club and we told them that we were interested in being organic beekeepers, and they were just like, that's not possible, you know, and it is.
Yeah.
23 years later, we are here to tell you it is.
Okay. So yeah, three things I think. Yeah, like that. Uh, uh, that it's possible to keep bees naturally, and then I think like an addendum to that is that bees require access to wholesome nutrition. There's really nothing that makes up for it. There's all these people that are there to tell you that there's pollen substitute that can be fed or
Oh yeah.
sugar, blah, blah, blah. It's just not true. If you don't have a good environment to keep them, then they're probably not going to do well. And maybe it would be better to do something different.
What surprised you the most about bees as you deepened into your journey over the last couple of decades?
Um, I guess.
I
Not
mean,
sure.
I think for me, when we got into beekeeping in the beginning, we really saw like we were thinking of ourselves as like homesteaders, and I think we were really thinking about like sustainably minded like, scale of everything. And I was surprised to turn into who I am today because if you had asked me 20 some years ago, I would have told you I don't want to have a forklift. I don't want to have that many hives. And I want it to be part of a more diversified farmscape. And we're still pursuing that goal. But I guess what surprised me the most is we just got like sucked in and it became this thing that grew and grew and grew in our lives. And I didn't and that I know why. It was just the passion and the really believing in what we were doing and believing that we needed to operate at the scale that we operate at in order to be what we want to be food producers for our society, to be elevating the honeybee with good practices. Those were things that we really felt like we had to grow to do. And that surprised me. Like I didn't anticipate that we would get to where we are now. And granted, now that we're here, it all makes perfect sense. And I love exactly who we are. I have no regrets. But I think I would have surprised my old self now. Yeah.
Well, I kind of wonder about that, like, because I feel like obviously the answer is it's tied into us having kids and have a family and making a livelihood out of it. But like, I'm trying to remember back if I felt like we could do that at 100 hives. It really took us more like where we're at now, 600 hives to have this like scale where we are also able to have like a family income.
Yeah. And
What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, do you think? Because I kind of do. Like, I felt like to have like 100 hives, maybe we would have been more diversified. Like, we would have had like more candle sales, more all these different things.
I mean, our mentor who supplied us with bees for a number of years in the beginning would laugh because we would keep revising. We would be like, we are thinking 10 hives. We're going to do this. And then the next year we're like, we're thinking 25 hives.
Yeah.
And then, oh, no, actually 50, and we kept, and that number just kept logically growing in our heads. But for some reason we were scared to dream that big in the beginning.
Yeah.
Something. Yeah, I mean, one thing about beekeeping, it's not that different from other forms of farming, is that it is very capital intensive. It's a very equipment intensive, and if you're not born into a commercial operation, which there are a lot of people, multi-generational operations out there, but if you're like us and you're first generation beekeeper, then it takes oftentimes kind of takes a while to grow the business. We know a lot of people who basically took their whole life to grow the business and then got it all right in time for retirement. We're sort of not that different, unfortunately. But
23 years in, and we got another 20 more, but we are hoping our kids are gonna help at some point. I mean, 21, you would be 71.
How old are your kids now?
Sorry?
What's that?
How old are your kids now?
12, 15, and 19.
Okay.
Yeah. And when you were talking about just like being little, all of our kids, they would dip their hands in the honey pot and they would like walk around to try to catch bees. And you would see them just sort of petting them. Our youngest, Tulsi, her first word, it was in our extracting room. It was when it was still in a school bus. And she walks up and she's like 1 year old and
you can hear her feet,
and she's just like sticky. I don't know, for
a first word.
For a first word, that was pretty cute. Yeah.
Oh, that's so sweet. Oh, I can just see her. Oh, that's precious. What excites you the most about bees and what you've learned and where you're going?
Oh no,
I want to take
Eric's
this,
like on fire.
This is the segue.
Eric has a hard time talking about anything else but bees.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Anytime anybody asks me how I'm doing, I just say to them, I'm doing how the bees are doing. So if I don't know how the bees are doing, then I don't know how I'm doing. If the bees are doing good, then I'm doing good. If the bees are doing bad, then I'm not doing good. And so that's just how I am. I'm just, I breathe about the bees all day long.
What excites you?
What excites me is where we're headed. And so what I'm telling people these days is the book is like the how-to manual, and it's the why, it's the passion, it's the ethic, and the how we run our business. And then the like, what's exciting for me right now is what's coming out of that. And what's coming out of that is a giant, is wonderful. Like, we kind of thought that the way we're engaging in our breeding program would be a very, very slow process. And we expected 20 years before we would maybe achieve success. And we're 8 years and we're starting to feel something from that. And that's really exciting. And so along with that, it's stimulating a bunch of new science. And so we're embarking on a bunch of new science focused on our operation and studying like the genetic implications and the behavioral implications of the way in which we run our operations. And so we're setting up some systems for monitoring and tracking and data recording about things that we think are unique to our operation. And we're going to ultimately overlay that with genetic data with some assistance from academia. And I think it's going to be a really, really valuable data set that's going to shed light on all kinds of wonderful stuff in the future.
Mhm.
That's where my fire is right now.
That's
And so I'll give a tiny little hint. What we've set up is a system of pedigree lineage tracking for all of our colonies. So basically, we're going to know the familial relations of every colony in the operation before long, and
wow.
and we'll know that all multi-generationally within the operation. And so that's going to create a very big data set for us to explore questions that we have about. I mean, of course, Varroa resistance is a big topic that we're interested in, but there's other topics that we're interested in. One of the big ones is queen longevity. We think that one of the byproducts of the grafting industry is the possibility that we are diminishing the longevity of queens in the industry. And we would like to create an environment where we can study that, because it's basically not being studied. So, yeah.
Curious. And how about you? What excites you the most, Joy?
I've been getting really into regenerative ag, into just seeing the effects of bee poop on the farmscape. So I have been chatting with folks at SOU at Southern Oregon University. And then recently we went to the Small Farms Conference at Oregon State University, and I was introduced to this really great soil scientist person. And he's also really interested in doing this research with me. So I was kind of—
Who is the protege of Joy's major professor from graduate school. So
yeah.
Neat.
So the three of us were on a Zoom call yesterday to talk about some research ideas, and the topics of Sarah grants and things like that come up, and I get really excited.
Wow, that's really cool. It was really it was very moving to hear you both get excited and talk about where you've ended up as commercial beekeepers. And I could just see how important and how purposeful your path has been, and how you are the light keepers and one of the voices for the bees. And so I just want to stand with you in that and really honor the fire that you've walked through and where you are and what's opening up for us to learn and just really be curious about as we continue to witness your journey and learn from a living example of what can and be and what is possible in raising bees organically and biodynamically and with resilience. So thank you for the work.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And with that, I also just want to say, thank you to Chelsea Green for seeing that in us.
Yes.
Eric and I have lived so rurally. We have been doing this, it's in a very small valley of about 17,000 people. And we would go to some of the bigger towns to go to the farmers markets, but to try to tell this larger audience of what we're doing. We're really thankful for the book, for that opportunity. And it was kind of crazy to have the time and the space and even the photos to write the book. We had no idea we were writing a book when we took all of the, but we did it. And that enabled us to meet you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
yes.
I'm so proud of us for doing that, for writing it down. We kind of did it because we were like, we need a manual for our kids. Like, what if something, we have to write this down. And it started off as like a 20-page document to like a 40-page, a 60-page. And right about then, Chelsea Green was like, I've got everybody on board. We're doing this.
That's so awesome. I love Chelsea Green and what the books that they put out and the way they support voices. Yeah, really powerful.
They were definitely our first pick for who we hoped to work with. So
oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So cool. And just one more question. What does regeneration mean to you?
I think it gets back to that statement that Joy said earlier, which is it's a topic that we talk about, which is this idea that we can, with good stewardship, we can increase the carrying capacity of the land.
Mm.
And I feel like in many places you can find evidence of First Peoples practices that did that. And but the reality is that in the modern industrial society that we've lived in the last few hundred years, I don't think we've done a very good job of taking care of the landscape. And so if you look around you, what I see is a lot of degraded landscapes. I was trained as a botanist. My first job actually was working in the woods and in meadows and prairies and wetlands. And I learned very quickly what intact native systems, natural systems look like. And then you start to realize how actually uncommon they are. And you look at all of these, the landscape, and how actually it's a tiny ghost of what it was before we damaged it and destroyed it. And so there is a lot of regeneration that really needs to occur for us on this planet. And the reality is that if we engage in that kind of behavior, we can dramatically change the carrying capacity of the land for all of life, all of creation. You know, like humans can benefit from that clearly, and so can everything else. So it sometimes it's just a space issue, but really it's about a management issue. If we could learn how to regenerate systems, then we could be back in the garden. We could have nature. You know, there's permaculture models that say that we could support 10 billion people on the planet and give 80% of the land base back to nature.
Yeah.
You know, like, so it's about good design and you know, yeah, that's what regeneration means to me.
To add to what you're saying, because I totally with you on what you're saying, is what comes up for me is to just like be involving the children. Like we can't, if we're not teaching the next generation of what we're doing, then it's not a permaculture, then it's not regeneration. And I guess that's where I just see this like breakdown, is when just we can't do these farming systems by ourselves. Like what it means is to take care of the land. Like the idea of like no farms, no food is true, but really what we absolutely need is people. We need it's no farmers, no food.
Yeah.
It's these farmers are the ones who are actually caring for the land in a way that a machine never can. And so I think to really bring back like what is regeneration, I think it has to involve like, it really just needs to involve a lot of people. That we're part of the problem, but we're also part of this. We are the solution.
Yeah, we are the ones we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
Yes, so be it. Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
I got one.
Tell me.
I'm on a tirade these days. My message for all people: eat more honey and know the beekeeper who produced it. It's a very simple thing. In our nation right now, the average annual consumption of honey is about 1.5 pounds per year. And the average consumption of sugar is like 80 pounds per year. And the sugar number keeps going up, but the honey number is not going up very fast. And beekeepers are intensely constrained by the messed up economy that they're operating in.
Yeah.
And honey is a health food, a superfood, nutritive, good for your stomach lining.
But
100% assimilar.
Also an international commodity.
And right now, over 50% of the honey consumed in this country is coming from other places in the world. And a lot of times that honey is being bought for about 80 cents a pound. So imagine what the beekeeper is being paid, and imagine the conditions that are being created in another place in the world because of them getting 80 cents a pound. And then imagine how constrained the beekeeper in the United States is trying to compete with that. They can't.
Yeah.
And the only thing that's ever going to fix it is consumer awareness. And it's not going to happen by just walking into a grocery store and buying stuff. We have to go meet your producer. There's local beekeepers everywhere. get to know one, and I'm challenging our nation to double their honey consumption. That means 3 pounds a year, people. Eat more honey, and it will change this. This will create a new economy where beekeepers have the resilience to change their management practices.
Yes.
Yes, I love that. I love all of that. Thank you, Eric. Thank
Cool.
you.
Sorry, yeah, that's my new closer.
It's good. It's powerful. Well, I'm a big honey lover. My brothers, I get my honey from my brothers right now. And it like what you said is so true about, we talk a lot about knowing our farmer, but knowing our beekeepers and knowing where the sugar comes from in our house, which could be honey instead of sugar, that's a powerful new narrative.
Yes. And so simple.
I mean, lowest carbon footprint sweetener, right? And first of all,
Yeah.
honey's not a sweetener, but carbohydrate, it's probably the lowest carbon footprint carbohydrate, aside from like cassava or starches.
Yeah, and it's so powerful. It's such a, it's like you said, it's like a medicine, you know, it's a healer. Awesome. Well, thank you. Big love to each of you.
Thank you.
And I will keep digging living.
Yeah.
Nice.
Nice.
You can find a link to Raising Resilient Bees, published by Chelsea Green, in the description below. And you can find Joy and Eric online at digginlivin.com. That's DIGGINLIVIN.com. And on Facebook and Instagram at Diggin Livin, and a few more other places on Instagram. You'll find their Airbnb at air_b_n_b for that delicious experience in their hive hut. And you'll find Joy's work at honeybee_healing_arts. That's for apiary. And you can follow the farm at diggin_livin_farm_and_apiaries on Instagram, and also on YouTube at Diggin Livin. When Joy and Eric mentioned how much honey is consumed versus how much sugar is consumed in a year by the average person, did you do a quick inventory in your head about how much honey that you have had in your home and in your tummy over the past year, and how much sugar? I know I sure did. And sadly, I think my sugar intake is still higher than my honey intake. And at the same time, we go through a lot of honey in our house. So I'm curious how much honey you are using, and what conversations will you be having with your friends about honey and about beekeeping? Maybe, just maybe, you can incorporate bee products into your gifts this year as you are celebrating birthdays and anniversaries and different events where you are bringing a gift to somebody, whether it's honey or candles, or perhaps it's a bee experience to a local bee farm. You make yourself an amazing day. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. I'm Natalie Forstbauer, founder and editor-in-chief of Heart and Soil Magazine. Head on over to heartandsoilmagazine.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter for free, or you can become a member of Heart and Soil Magazine and get access to all the back issues. Big love and bright blessings. Namaste. I love you.